Hello, everybody. When we hear the word freedom, most of us think about rights. We think about independence. We think about the ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want. But I want to challenge you today with a deeper truth. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the presence of responsibility. Without responsibility, freedom becomes chaos. Without responsibility, it destroys more than it builds. Real freedom is the ability to choose your response to life's challenges. It's the discipline to act in alignment with your values, even when it's inconvenient. It's the courage to do what's right, not just what's easy. Freedom begins with self-mastery, because without control over yourself, every other kind of freedom becomes shallow and short-lived. You can have the freedom to spend your money any way you want, but if you lack the discipline to manage it, that freedom will bury you in debt. You can have the freedom to eat whatever you like, but without the responsibility to care for your health, that freedom will steal your energy and your future. Self-mastery is the foundation that allows freedom to flourish. It's the ability to govern your impulses, to act according to principles instead of moods, and to choose your long-term well-being over short-term gratification. Without that foundation, freedom quickly turns into bondage. The bondage of bad habits, poor decisions, and wasted potential. Think of someone who lands their first high-paying job. They feel liberated. They can finally buy what they want, travel, enjoy life. But without self-mastery, their spending gets out of control. They buy on impulse, say yes to every outing, and avoid budgeting because it feels restrictive. In a year, they're living paycheck to paycheck, anxious about bills, and unable to invest in opportunities that would secure their future. Their freedom to spend has now turned into a trap. This is the paradox. Freedom without self-mastery doesn't lead to more freedom, it leads to less. Self-mastery means you understand that discipline is not the enemy of freedom. It's the guardian of it. It's the ability to tell yourself no in the moment, so you can say yes to bigger, better things later. It's choosing to put in the work even when you don't feel like it, because you're guided by values, not just emotions. People who master themselves don't drift through life reacting to whatever comes. They act intentionally. They choose their habits instead of letting habits choose them. And because of that, they experience a deeper level of freedom, the kind that lasts. This applies to every area of life. In relationships, self-mastery means controlling your temper, listening before you speak, and being the kind of person others can trust. In health, it means making the daily choice to move your body, fuel it with good food, and rest well. In work, it means doing the things that matter most even when they're hard, rather than chasing distractions. Each of these acts of self-mastery may feel like small sacrifices, but they compound into a life where you have options, opportunities, and confidence. That's real freedom. I once worked with a young man who dreamed of starting his own business. He was smart, creative, and driven when he felt like it. The problem was, he didn't have the self-mastery to work on his idea consistently. He'd have bursts of productivity followed by weeks of procrastination. He told himself he was free to work whenever inspiration struck, but that freedom only led to stagnation. When he finally committed to a disciplined schedule, waking up at the same time, working on his business for at least 2 hours every day, no matter what, everything changed. In 6 months, he had a functioning product and his first customers. His creativity didn't disappear with discipline. It actually thrived because he was showing up consistently. The truth is, self-mastery doesn't limit you. It liberates you. When you master yourself, you trust yourself. You know that you will follow through on your commitments. That trust builds confidence, and confidence expands your freedom, because you're no longer afraid to take risks. You know you have the discipline to do the work, handle the challenges, and stick to the course. People who lack self-mastery are always at the mercy of circumstances. If the conditions are right, they act. If they're not, they stall. People with self-mastery act regardless of the conditions, and that's why they create opportunities others only dream about. If you want to experience true freedom, you have to ask yourself some hard questions. Where in your life are you being held back by your own lack of discipline? Where are you choosing comfort over growth? What habits are quietly stealing your freedom? Be honest with yourself, because awareness is the first step toward change. Once you've identified the area, commit to one daily habit that will strengthen your self-mastery there. It doesn't have to be huge. Small, consistent actions are more powerful than big, sporadic ones. But it has to be non-negotiable. Every time you keep that promise to yourself, you're not just building a habit, you're building freedom. You cannot separate freedom from responsibility, and the first responsibility you have is to yourself. Master yourself, and you unlock the power to master your circumstances. Let yourself drift, and you will always be at the mercy of forces outside your control. Self-mastery is not about perfection. It's about direction. It's choosing, day after day, to align your actions with your highest values and your long-term vision. That is the kind of freedom that no one can take from you. The responsibility of choice is at the heart of real freedom, because freedom without wise choices leads to consequences that can trap you. Every single day, you are faced with decisions, some small, some life-changing, and each one shapes your future. The reality is that your life right now is the sum of the choices you've made up to this point. The job you have, the relationships you're in, the health you enjoy or struggle with, the skills you've developed. They are all results of choices, whether they were intentional or made by default. Freedom gives you the right to choose, but responsibility demands that you choose with foresight, with values, and with the understanding that every choice has a ripple effect. I've seen so many people confuse the ability to choose with the license to do whatever feels good in the moment. That's not real freedom. That's short-term thinking disguised as liberation. The truth is every choice you make is a trade-off. Choosing one thing means you're saying no to something else. The student who chooses to party every weekend instead of studying may be enjoying their immediate freedom, but they're trading away the freedom of having more career opportunities later. The entrepreneur who chooses to ignore the numbers because they're uncomfortable may avoid stress today, but sacrifices the freedom that comes from a thriving business in the future. I remember a young woman I mentored who received 2 job offers. One was in a flashy industry with a big salary and perks that would make her friends envious. The other was a modest, paying position in a non-profit that aligned perfectly with her passion for social impact. Freedom gave her the ability to take either job, but the responsibility of choice asked her to consider what mattered most. Did she want immediate status and comfort, or did she want fulfillment and alignment with her values, even if it meant a slower financial climb? After a lot of reflection, she chose the nonprofit. Years later, she not only rose into leadership, but also created programs that impacted thousands of lives. Her choice cost her some short-term luxuries, but bought her a lifetime of meaning and influence. That's the power of responsible choice. It creates long-term dividends. The challenge is that many people drift through life making choices on autopilot. They react to circumstances, follow the crowd, or take the path of least resistance. They say yes when they should say no, no when they should say yes, and often fail to pause long enough to ask, what will this choice cost me? What will it give me? The habit of pausing to think about the outcome of a decision before making it is one of the most important disciplines you can develop if you want your freedom to last. It's also important to remember that not choosing is still a choice. Choosing to avoid a decision means you're letting someone else or something else decide for you. That's how people lose their freedom without even realizing it. If you don't decide how to use your time, other people will. If you don't decide what your values are, society will assign them to you. If you don't decide where your money goes, your habits will drain it for you. Every moment you're either exercising your power of choice or surrendering it. A powerful way to bring responsibility into your choices is to measure them against your core values and your vision for your life. If a decision aligns with your values and moves you toward your vision, it's a responsible choice. If it contradicts your values or takes you further from your vision, it's not worth the cost, no matter how tempting it might seem in the moment. That's the filter that helps you stay true to yourself when you have the freedom to do many things, but can only choose one. The next time you face a significant decision, slow down and ask yourself 3 questions. Will this choice expand my life or shrink it? Will it strengthen my character or weaken it? Will my future self thank me for this or resent me for it? Those questions take you out of the momentary emotion and put you in the mindset of responsibility. Freedom without the responsibility of choice leads to wasted opportunities, regret, and limitation. But when you take ownership of your choices, when you see them as seeds you are planting for your future, freedom becomes something that grows instead of something that slips away. Every choice becomes a building block for the kind of life you truly want. And that's the essence of living with both freedom and responsibility. Choosing not just for now, but for the future you want to create. Freedom requires accountability because without it, freedom quickly turns into entitlement. Accountability is the willingness to take ownership of your actions, your results, and even your failures without hiding behind excuses or blaming external factors. It's easy to celebrate freedom when things are going well, but true character is revealed when you face setbacks and take responsibility for them. This is where many people stumble. They love the benefits of freedom, but shy away from the weight of responsibility that comes with it. Without accountability, freedom becomes an illusion because you're not really in control of your life. You're just drifting, letting circumstances dictate your path. I've seen this happen in organizations all the time. A leader takes credit when the team exceeds its goals, but blames the market, the economy, or competitors when the numbers fall short. That's not leadership, and it's not responsible freedom. True leaders and true free individuals look in the mirror first. They ask, what could I have done differently? How can I learn from this? What's my next step to fix it? This mindset doesn't weaken them. It strengthens them because it keeps their sense of control intact. When you take ownership, you maintain the power to change the outcome next time. There's a story I often share about a manager who missed a critical deadline for a client project. The easy route would have been to blame his team for not working fast enough or for making mistakes. Instead, he stood in front of his client and said, "This was my responsibility, and I failed to deliver on time. Here's how I'm going to make it right." The client was understandably frustrated, but they respected him for his honesty and commitment to fix the problem. That act of accountability not only preserved the business relationship, but strengthened it, because accountability builds trust, and trust is the foundation of both personal and professional freedom. In personal life, accountability works the same way. If you're not willing to hold yourself responsible for your finances, your health, your relationships, or your goals, you're giving away your freedom without realizing it. The person who blames their poor health solely on genetics or their lack of career progress on their boss is choosing a powerless position. When you believe it's all someone else's fault, you also believe you have no ability to change it. Accountability, on the other hand, says, I may not have caused every problem in my life, but I am responsible for how I respond to them. That shift is where freedom truly lies. Accountability also means following through on the commitments you make to yourself and others. If you say you'll be somewhere at a certain time, show up. If you promise to deliver a project by Friday, deliver it. If you commit to saving a certain amount of money, honor that commitment. These small acts of accountability compound over time to create reliability and trust, not just with others, but within yourself. When you know you can count on yourself to do what you said you'd do, your confidence grows. That confidence expands your freedom because it removes the self-doubt that keeps so many people from acting. One of the best ways to practice accountability is to make your commitments visible. Write them down. Share them with someone you trust. Track your progress. When your goals and promises are out in the open, you feel a stronger sense of responsibility to follow through. This is why accountability partners, mentors, and coaches are so powerful. They create a structure where you're more likely to keep your word. But even without a partner, you can hold yourself accountable by keeping a record and reviewing it regularly. It's important to remember that accountability is not about self-blame or perfectionism. It's not about beating yourself up for mistakes. It's about owning those mistakes, learning from them, and making the changes necessary to improve. Accountability says, yes, I fell short, but I'm still in control of what happens next. That's a much more empowering stance than blaming someone else and waiting for them to fix your life. If you want to preserve your freedom, you have to guard it with accountability. The moment you stop taking responsibility, you start handing over your power. The more you blame, the more powerless you feel, and the less freedom you have to shape your future. But when you consistently take ownership of your actions, your words, your results, you strengthen your ability to influence your life's direction. That's when freedom becomes real, sustainable, and deeply fulfilling. Serving others protects freedom because freedom is never just about what you can get. It's about what you can give. The strongest, most enduring freedoms are the ones that are shared. When individuals focus only on themselves, on what they can take, gain, or hold on to, freedom begins to erode. But when people actively contribute to the well-being of others, the fabric of community strengthens, and that collective strength safeguards everyone's freedom. Service creates a sense of mutual responsibility, and mutual responsibility keeps freedom alive for generations. Think about a neighborhood where no one looks out for each other. Everyone stays behind locked doors, ignoring problems, refusing to get involved. Over time, the area deteriorates. Lawns become overgrown, crime increases, trust vanishes. Now compare that to a neighborhood where people know each other, help each other, and work together to maintain shared spaces. The difference is not just in appearance, it's in the atmosphere of safety, trust, and opportunity. In the first case, freedom becomes fragile because there's no unity to protect it. In the second, freedom is reinforced by a community of people who care. Serving others is not limited to grand acts of heroism or public service. It's in the everyday choices to put someone else's needs before your own comfort. It's the employee who stays late to help a colleague meet a deadline. It's the neighbor who organizes a cleanup after a storm. It's the citizen who volunteers at the local food bank or mentors a young person. These acts may seem small, but collectively they create a culture of care. And in a culture of care, people are less likely to exploit their freedoms at the expense of others, and more likely to protect the rights and dignity of all. I remember meeting a business leader who built his company not just to make a profit, but to make a difference. He implemented policies that provided training and education for employees so they could grow beyond their current roles, even if it meant eventually leaving the company. Some people told him he was giving too much away, that it would hurt his bottom line. But he understood something deeper. When you invest in others, you create loyalty, trust, and a ripple effect of goodwill. His employees worked harder, stayed longer, and spoke positively about the company, attracting more talent and customers. His willingness to serve didn't weaken his position, it strengthened it. His freedom as a business owner was protected by the loyalty of those he served. Serving others also shifts your perspective. When you focus only on yourself, every problem feels like a personal attack, and every inconvenience feels like an injustice. But when you make it a habit to serve, you begin to see how interconnected we all are. You recognize that your well-being is tied to the well-being of others. That awareness changes the way you use your freedom. You become less likely to abuse it because you understand its impact beyond yourself. Service is also a form of leadership. You don't need a title or authority to lead. You just need the willingness to take responsibility for something that matters. In times of crisis, people remember those who stepped forward to help. In times of stability, they remember those who quietly made things better without being asked. That's the kind of influence that protects not just your own freedom, but the freedom of everyone around you. Some people hesitate to serve because they think they don't have enough resources, time, or influence to make a difference. But serving isn't about having everything. It's about using what you do have. You might not be able to give large sums of money, but you can give your time, your skills, your encouragement, or your presence. A single act of kindness can spark a chain of events you'll never fully see. The important thing is to start. If you want to protect your freedom, look for ways to serve. Start with one small, intentional act this week, something that strengthens the community you're part of, whether that's your family, workplace, neighborhood, or a larger cause. Not only will you make a tangible difference, but you'll also be strengthening the invisible bonds that hold freedom together. In a world where people are quick to take, but slow to give, being someone who serves is an act of quiet rebellion. And it's one of the most powerful ways you can honor and preserve the gift of freedom. Freedom without principles destroys itself because when there is no moral compass, freedom quickly turns into self-indulgence, exploitation, and harm. Principles act as the guardrails that keep our choices from running off the road. They define what is right, what is fair, and what is worth protecting. Without them, freedom becomes dangerous, not just to others, but to ourselves. History is filled with examples of people and nations who claimed freedom as their highest value. Yet without principles, their actions led to corruption, injustice, and the eventual loss of that very freedom. Principles are timeless truths. They aren't dependent on popularity, trends, or personal convenience. Honesty, integrity, respect, fairness, service. These are the kinds of values that anchor freedom in something greater than personal desire. When people abandon these principles, they start making decisions based solely on what benefits them in the moment. They justify cutting corners, telling lies, or taking advantage of others because they can. And while those choices may feel like freedom in the short term, they sow the seeds of distrust, division, and eventual collapse. Think about the workplace. Imagine a company that prides itself on giving employees total freedom to manage their schedules, work from anywhere, and set their own pace. That sounds ideal. But if employees don't have the principles of accountability and honesty, that freedom gets abused. Some stop meeting deadlines, others put in minimal effort, and resentment builds among those who are carrying the load. Eventually, the company is forced to take back the freedoms it gave because the lack of principles made them unsustainable. In contrast, a company that builds a culture around clear values, respect, ownership, and excellence can give its people tremendous freedom because those values guide behavior even when no one is watching. I once knew a young leader who had a chance to win a major contract for his business by slightly exaggerating the capabilities of his team. It would have been easy. No one would have known, and the immediate payoff would have been huge. But he refused because one of his core principles was honesty. He lost that deal, but he gained the trust of his industry. Years later, when a bigger and better opportunity came along, the decision makers chose him specifically because of his reputation for integrity. His principles cost him in the short run, but they preserved and expanded his freedom in the long run. Living by principles also makes decision-making easier. When you're anchored to values, you don't waste time debating every choice based on short-term gains. You have a filter if it violates your principles. It's a no, no matter how tempting it looks. This protects your freedom because it prevents you from making decisions that could trap you in lies, obligations, or consequences you don't want. Principles also create trust, and trust is essential for freedom. In any relationship, personal, professional, or societal, freedom only works when there's trust. If people believe you will act with honesty, fairness, and respect, they will give you more room to operate freely. But if they think you'll act selfishly or deceptively, they will restrict you. That's why people who consistently live by strong principles tend to enjoy greater freedom over time, because others trust them to use it wisely. It's easy to live by principles when life is comfortable, but the real test comes when principles cost you something. That's when you discover whether your values are truly guiding you or just slogans you like to repeat. If you abandon your principles when they're inconvenient, you're not really free. You're just following your impulses. And impulses, left unchecked, will eventually lead you into situations where your freedom is compromised. If you want your freedom to last, you need to identify your core principles and commit to living by them no matter what. Write them down. Keep them visible. Let them guide your big decisions and your small ones. And remember, principles aren't just for personal benefit. They're for the benefit of the people and systems you're part of. When you live by them, you help create an environment where everyone's freedom is safer and stronger. The real measure of freedom isn't how much you can do, it's how much you choose to do within the boundaries of what is right. Principles give you those boundaries. They protect you from yourself when temptation strikes, and they protect others from the misuse of your freedom. Without them, freedom is fragile and fleeting. With them, freedom becomes a force for good. Something that can be trusted, something that can grow, and something that can last for generations. The courage to protect freedom is one of the most defining qualities of a truly responsible person, because freedom is never guaranteed. It must be defended, nurtured, and, at times, fought for. Not only in the political sense, but in everyday life. Protecting freedom often means standing up for what's right when it's unpopular, speaking the truth when it's inconvenient, and making sacrifices when it would be easier to stay silent. The reality is, freedom is fragile. If you don't have the courage to protect it, you will lose it, either piece by piece or all at once. Courage in this context doesn't always look dramatic. It's not always about grand speeches or public protests. More often, it's the quiet, consistent choice to live by your values, to act with integrity, and to call out what is wrong even when it costs you. Many people avoid these moments because they fear rejection, conflict, or loss. But history shows us that every time freedom has been preserved or restored, it was because ordinary people acted with extraordinary courage in moments when it would have been easier to look the other way. I think of a woman I once met who worked for a large organization. She discovered that her department was hiding information from clients, details that, if disclosed, would have influenced major decisions. She wrestled with the situation because she knew that speaking up could cost her job and her relationships with colleagues. But she also knew that remaining silent would compromise her integrity and contribute to the erosion of trust. Eventually, she made the decision to report what she had found. As expected, the process was messy. She lost friends at work and her role changed. But over time, her actions led to reforms in the company's policies and greater transparency for all clients. That's what courage to protect freedom looks like. Choosing what is right over what is easy, even when the outcome is uncertain. Courage is also required to protect your own personal freedom. Sometimes that means setting boundaries with people who try to control you, or saying no to opportunities that would require you to compromise your values. Sometimes it means walking away from a toxic environment, even if it means starting over. The temptation to stay in situations that are familiar, even if they are limiting, is strong. But if you let fear of change dictate your choices, you'll slowly give away pieces of your freedom until there's nothing left. In a broader sense, protecting freedom means being vigilant about the conditions that allow it to exist. When you see patterns of dishonesty, injustice, or exploitation, whether in your workplace, your community, or your country, you have a responsibility to speak up. Silence may keep you comfortable in the moment, but it gives permission for those patterns to continue. Courage is about breaking that cycle, even if you're the only one willing to stand in the gap. It's important to understand that courage doesn't mean you're fearless. It means you feel the fear and act anyway. The fear will always be there. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of loss. But courage acknowledges the fear and moves forward because the cause is worth it. Every time you choose courage, you strengthen your ability to protect what matters, and you inspire others to do the same. Courage is contagious. One person's stand can give someone else the strength to stand as well. One of the most effective ways to build courage is to practice it in small ways every day. Speak up in a meeting when you have an idea. Defend someone who is being treated unfairly. Admit when you've made a mistake instead of covering it up. These moments might feel small, but they are training your character for the bigger moments when the stakes are higher. By practicing courage in your daily life, you prepare yourself to protect your freedom and the freedom of others when it truly counts. If you want to live in a way that honors and preserves freedom, you cannot avoid the moments that call for courage. You must see them as opportunities to protect something precious. The freedoms you enjoy today were secured by the courage of those who came before you, and the freedoms of tomorrow depend on the courage you choose to show now. It may cost you comfort. It may cost you opportunities. But the alternative, losing your ability to live, speak, and act according to your values, is far more costly. The courage to protect freedom is not just a noble ideal, it's a practical necessity. If you believe freedom matters, then you must also believe it is worth defending. That means acting when it's easier to remain still, speaking when it's safer to be silent, and standing when it's more comfortable to blend in. Freedom can be taken by force, but more often it is lost through neglect. Courage ensures we don't let that happen. Freedom is a legacy because it does not begin and end with you. It is something you inherit, shape, and pass on. Every generation inherits a certain level of freedom from those who came before, and what you do with it determines what the next generation will experience. This truth applies to nations, to families, to communities, and to individual relationships. If you use your freedom selfishly, without regard for how your actions ripple forward, you weaken the foundation for those who will follow. But if you use it with intention, responsibility, and vision, you strengthen the path for others to walk on after you. When you think of freedom as a legacy, your perspective shifts. You stop seeing it as something you own and start seeing it as something you steward. You understand that every choice you make sets an example, either one that others can safely follow or one that leads them into danger. This is especially true for parents, mentors, and leaders, but it's not limited to them. Even if you don't think of yourself as a role model, someone is watching how you live. Someone is learning from the way you use your time, your resources, your voice, and your influence. I once spoke with a man who grew up in a family where money was always tight. His parents worked hard, but they never learned how to save or invest. When he became an adult and started earning a good income, he realized he had two choices: repeat the same patterns or use his freedom to change the story for his children. He chose the latter. He studied personal finance, built a budget, started a small investment account, and taught his kids about managing money from a young age. Years later, not only was his own family financially secure, but his children carried those habits into their adult lives. His freedom wasn't just about what he could buy. It was about the knowledge, discipline, and security he passed down. Freedom as a legacy also applies to values. The principles you live by don't just affect your own life. They influence the culture you create around you. If you lead with honesty, fairness, and respect, those values become part of the environment for others. If you cut corners, act dishonestly, or misuse your power, you normalize those behaviors, and they spread. The next generation will inherit not only the freedoms you enjoyed, but also the ethical climate you leave behind. That's why it's critical to guard your character as fiercely as you guard your rights. It's tempting to think that your actions are isolated, but they rarely are. The freedoms we enjoy today freedom of speech, freedom of opportunity, freedom of choice were preserved by the sacrifices of people who knew they might never personally benefit from their efforts. They acted with the future in mind. They understood that freedom is never just for the present moment. It is a gift to be carried forward. You stand on the shoulders of people who refuse to let fear, hardship, or opposition stop them from protecting and expanding freedom. The question is, will the next generation be able to say the same about you? Leaving a legacy of freedom also means equipping others to handle it well. Freedom without preparation can be overwhelming or even destructive. If you give someone total freedom without the tools to use it wisely, they can easily make choices that harm themselves or others. That's why mentorship, education, and example are so important. When you model how to pair freedom with responsibility, you give others the best chance to enjoy and protect it long after you're gone. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Passing on a legacy of freedom is not about never making mistakes. It's about showing how to recover from them, learn from them, and make better choices in the future. It's about being honest about your struggles and intentional about your growth. Those watching you will learn more from your resilience and integrity in hard times than from your ease in good times. If you truly value freedom, you need to ask yourself, what am I doing today that will matter for those who come after me? This could be as simple as teaching your children critical life skills, as profound as starting a movement to protect human rights, or as personal as living with such integrity that others are inspired to do the same. Every intentional act adds a brick to the foundation of freedom for the future. You will leave a legacy whether you plan to or not. The only question is what kind of legacy it will be. Will it be one of strength, responsibility, and opportunity, or one of neglect, selfishness, and decline? The freedom you enjoy today is not just for you. It is entrusted to you so that you can pass it on in better condition than you received it. If you live with that mindset, your life will not only be free, it will ensure that others have the same gift and perhaps even more. That is the ultimate responsibility, and it is one worth embracing every single day. Thank you very much.